You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Dave, I have a stack waddy for you.
Good.
Sent in by one of our listeners, Douglas Green. And Douglas says, I notice there's a long tradition of pop musicians appearing in TV comedy shows, presumably because everyone feels this is a win-win. He said, we all know about Elton John and Morecambe and Wise, Cliff Richard and the Young Ones. However, I have listed 6 less well-known ones, one of which is fictitious. So I'm going to read these out, and you have to spot the ringer. Number one. Mm-hmm. I'll go through them, and then you see if you can guess at the end. Number one, John Lennon appeared in a 1966 episode of Peter Cook Dudley Moore's Not Only But Also, featuring as a lavatory attendant. Number 2, at the end of a 1971 episode of Monty Python's Flying Circus, a chat show featuring Ringo Starr and Lulu is cut off by the closing credits. Number 3, Cozy Fanny Tutti of Throbbing Gristle was a model and a dancer in a previous life, and she appeared as an artist's model in Only When I Laugh, starring James Bolan, Peter Bowles and Richard Wilson, when the patients take part in a life drawing class.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Number 4, in 1993, Robert Smith appeared as himself in a fantasy sequence where David Baddiel imagines that who would attend his funeral. Number 5, in the opening scene of a final episode of Father Ted, Brian Eno makes a blink and you miss it appearance as a Catholic priest. And lastly, George Michael appears as himself in a 2002 episode of Little Britain, where he accepts wheelchair-bound Andy's invitation to his birthday party in a harvester, despite the fact that Andy has formerly described Jesus to a child as being emotionally vapid. So there you go. Those are the 6, and your challenge, should you choose to accept it, is to work out which of those isn't true.
Who provided these? What was the name of the...
Douglas Green.
Douglas. Very good work, Douglas. Very good work in kind of raking up the real ones and making up the fictitious one, which I really have no idea about. I know, going through them from the beginning, I know John Lennon definitely did that lavatory attendant.
He did. The Ad Lav Club.
And I think I'm right in saying I was walking down that street.
Dan the Doorman.
I think I was walking down that street only recently, and I think that underground lavatory is still there. It's in Broadwick Street in Soho.
That's the one.
Outside what used
with
to be
the metal gate round it. That's right, yeah, the metal fence.
Warner Brothers Records HQ. So that one was definitely real. What was the second one?
Second one was the Monty Python with Ringo Starr and Lulu.
I'll give you that real. Yeah. Is it real? Is it real?
That is real.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, the thing is, Michael Palin just appears as a kind of gentleman of the road. It's just a weird little surreal moment. He comes on and sits down and none of them speak, and then it cuts immediately. It goes now for something completely different or whatever. You know? So it's only about 3 or 4 seconds, but you look and you just think, it's Lulu and it's Ringo Starr. What? Brilliant.
What's the third again?
Third one was Cozy Fanny Tutti of Throbbing Gristle.
Yeah, it has to be true, because I think she did work as a model. Is it true? Is it true? Tell me it's true.
It's not true. She did work as a model, but it isn't true. Actually,
it's not
true.
No,
it never happened. But there was an episode where the patients adopt a dog, which they named Throbbing Gristle. So there is a sort of connection. But no, that didn't happen.
I do happen to know, while we're touching on the subject of Cozy Fanny Tutti, the cover of the UFO heavy metal album Fawcett.
That's right, in a shower.
Hilarious pun on faucet as in tap. Features a couple engaged in standing sexual congress in a bathroom. And I think the two individuals are both members of Throbbing Gristle. I think we're right in saying
they are, because the other member was part of Hypnosis, wasn't he?
Yeah, Peter. Well, Peter Christopher was the third member of Hypnosis for a period of time. was kind of allied with them and was very involved in all that sort of stuff. Anyway, so is that the Ringer? Is that the Ringer?
That's the Ringer, but Robert Smith did appear, and there's a brilliant scene where all these people, David Baddiel has been buried, and all these people are standing at his graveside. And the camera pans along and gets to Robert Smith. Robert Smith just says, I always thought he was funnier than the other guy, which is really good. Then the last, Father Ted, Brian Eno does appear very briefly. And the gag is that he's introduced as Father Brian Eno. And Ted goes towards him to talk to him and then dragged away, so doesn't get a chance to speak to him. And George Michael, did appear. That was a comic relief thing, actually. And very briefly and very, very, very courageously, actually. So very good work from Douglas.
Very, very good work, Douglas. And if anybody's got a further suggestion for a Stackwaddy game, because if you haven't already got it, the idea of the Stackwaddy game is popular music now is too mad. They're so mad that you can't tell what you made up and what you didn't. You know what I mean? So it's Stackwaddy. It derives from, it gets its name from the legendary heavy metal group that nobody believes actually existed, but did. Okay.
Did, and had an album called Bugger Off, signed to John Peel's Dandelion label. Absolutely. So there it is. No, send them in if you have any.
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
So this week we had an election, in case you didn't notice. How many Labour prime ministers have been elected, Mark? How many have been elected? Do you know?
Actually elected, I think I know this, and I think it's 5, but I may be right. Is that right?
It's 5. It's Ramsay MacDonald, Clement Attlee, Harold Wilson, Tony Blair, and now Keir Starmer. And somehow this made me, I was just sitting there musing, and I was thinking, I wonder what's in the chart the week that Keir Starmer moves into number 10. And so I had a look at the official albums chart, and I'm going to run down it for you, Mark, because, you may not keep up with this thing as a rule. Okay. And number 1, The Secret of Ours by Gracie Abrams. And number 2, The Tortured Poets Department by Taylor Swift. And number 3, Hit Me Hard and Soft by Billie Eilish. Number 4, Brat by Charlie XCX. At 5, The Highlights by Weeknd. At 6, The Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess by Chappell Roan. Number 7, Lover by Taylor Swift. And number 8, I don't know why, Eminem's Greatest Hits album, Curtain Calls. And number 9, Taylor Swift, once again, 1989, Taylor's version. And at number 10, 50 years of hits of Fleetwood Mac, Don't Stop, So
that's interesting, isn't it?
If you exclude the kind of Eminem and of the Fleetwood Mac, it is quite remarkable that, that there's nothing there that resembles what you might call a traditional group, of which more in a moment. But the other thing is obviously...
bands, and also they're all American, aren't they?
No, they're not all American. They're not all American, but what they are predominantly is female.
Fleetwood Mac.
Okay, well, I'm excluding Fleetwood Mac and I'm excluding Eminem, from this, because they're kind of really odd. I mean, because they're from years ago. But just looking at the current kind of hits, they're overwhelmingly female. Which just indicates to what extent popular music has fundamentally changed over the last 25 years, And it's quite interesting when you look into the background of so many of them, how they kind of came up, that it is quite remarkable how many of them come from what would have been referred to in times gone by 40 years ago, but as a kind of mixed marriages, or they come from different cultural backgrounds.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Yeah. One parent from Scotland, one from, I don't know, Albania or whatever. Yeah. It's a very, very different world. And if you look at how they kind of got their start, it's a very, very different thing. They all had some kind of patron Svengali figure, label head, you know what I mean? Well-connected person who somehow, They found their way to quite early on, and then via a combination of kind of artful cover versions on TikTok, collaborations with other better known artists, commercial tie-ins, all kinds of things. They slowly made their way to their current position of prominence. It's just absolutely fascinating. And it's particularly fascinating if you contrast that with the previous time a Labour Prime Minister moved into Downing Street, which was called Tony Blair, in 1997. So, okay, I'm now going to read from 10 to 1 the top 10 albums from that week that Tony Blair moved into Downing Street. Number 10. Ocean Drive by the Lighthouse Family. And number 9, Blur by Blur. And number 8, Mother Nature Calls by Cast. And number 7, Dig Your Own Hole by the Chemical Brothers. And number 6, Ultra by Depeche Mode.
You're brilliantly developing that kind of chart voice here, aren't you?
Doing it. You can't afford it. It. And now coming in at number 5, new entry, Shelter by the Brand New Heavies.
The
The voice is warming up now. And number 4, White on Blonde by Texas. And number 3, Spice by Spice Girls. And number 2, also a new entry, In It For The Money by Supergrass.
In with a bullet.
And number one in the album charts for the week that the previous Labour Prime Minister moved into Downing Street, moved into Downing Street in 1997, is Telling Stories by the Charlatans. Now,
Isn't that astonishing?
I don't think you can have a more dramatic contrast.
No. I mean, they're all of them, I think all 10 are bands. Is that right?
Yeah,
I mean, the majority of those are actually are Britpop, really, part of the whole Britpop thing, which is also interesting because there's no real notion of a sense of kind of British music at the moment, is there? Do you think?
Well, it doesn't seem to be.
It doesn't seem to be. And also there's no real sense of even local music, Everything is now just accessed by streaming and you're not really aware of the context of where it was from, And also the thing about Britpop, I think one of the things is that Britpop was a kind of community. You supported Britpop. Therefore, the person who bought, the Blur album or the Supergrass album was probably quite likely to have bought the Cast album too. You were just kind of part of that whole movement, were you?
Well, I suppose so. I mean, there's so many things that changed, not least the fact that in 1997, people went and bought records, actually bought them, probably queued up.
Well, that's it. I mean, the albums being an event in themselves, that really, not sure. These were records that people would have got together and listened to communally, wouldn't they?
Well, maybe. I don't know. The thing that strikes me about it is that all those acts they had some kind of existence outside the chart. Particularly if you look at that lot, actually, the Charlatans and Cast and whatever, their sort of self-image was, we're not really all that popular. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
We're a bit of an acquired taste. We are over here, you know what I mean? We're rather surprised to find ourselves in the chart, and we normally exist over here in this world of, I don't know.
Yeah, we weren't looking for commercial success at all. We're just interested in the idea of self-expression.
Absolutely, we belong on the Steve Lamacq show on Nighttime Radio 1 or in The NME or whatever. That was. They were pale creatures, blinking at the light, weren't they? All those groups. Whereas you look at the ones that are in the chart now, and they don't seem to have that kind of life at all. They sort of exist in the spotlight, or not at all. You know what I mean? You can't do that kind of. You can't be Dua Lipa or whatever without being absolutely at the top of the tree, can you? You know what I mean?
No, and also I may be completely wrong about this, but you don't get the impression that the new guard kind of worked their way up to that point.
Well, they were.
What happens is you put a load of music out, and the music is accessed by loads of people and sells very well. And therefore, when you enter the kind of live arena, you tend to enter very, very, very quite high up.
Yeah, but these people, they struggle just as much, and but in a completely different way. That it's not going out there and playing the Retford Porthouse on a Tuesday night, is it? It might be doing, I don't know, personal appearances all over the place, or strange tie-ins, or things with advertisers, or things involving fashion brands, or I don't know, all kinds of different ways. But it really struck me. Now I know there's no great relationship between 1997 and 2024, other than the coincidence I picked of a Labour Prime Minister being elected the same week. But you look at those two things, the chart then and the chart now, and you think they're doing fundamentally different things.
Completely different. As you say, they're polar opposites, aren't they?
It's like, it's like looking at, I don't know, it's like looking at cinema attendances in the week the Jazz Singer was released, and cinema attendances in the week the Star Wars came out. They've got nothing to do with each other at all.
Not remotely.
It's just we refer to them as the same thing, but that kind of the fact that, and you go back to your 1997. And apart from the fact that there were predominantly male groups.
They're male groups.
Because
male British groups. And these are now solo female,
international. They are. They're a lot of them are just not particularly rooted in one, you don't identify them as American or British or Albanian or whatever. They exist in the kind of the international world of pop music, really. And people interact them in a very, very different way. And you can't say one's the right way and one's the wrong way or anything. But if you go back, I don't know, whoever's sitting here when the next Labour Prime Minister is walking into Downing Street will be able to do the same, compare and contrast. It'll no doubt be just as dissimilar.
Yeah. And on the subject of Britishness, did you follow the story of Ed Sheeran going out to play for the England squad? I only
caught the edges of that.
I just thought it was so interesting because James Blunt, who's just absolute genius on Twitter, I think. James Blunt just tweeted this thing. He said, that Ed Sheeran was going to England's squad base in Germany, and he said that's right. The text was Ed Sheeran visits England camp to give a private performance. It was a moral boosting trot out of Shape of You or whatever. And obviously now a compulsory part of the training schedule. And Blunt said, I'm booked to do the same if they lose against Switzerland, which is just brilliant, I think. And the things he said in the past, when people used to say that he was vapid and weedy and irritating and excruciating and a kind of beta male and embarrassing, he always used to say, I'm mortgage free. And there was that brilliant story. Do you remember during COVID when the speaker system was set up and Barry Manilow's music was being played loudly to people in the anti-vax protests in New Zealand, and his tweet was, give me a shout if this doesn't work. Really good, I think.
Very good.
And James Blunt among the Elizabeth Line passengers stuck for hours when cables failed. He tweeted that story and said, I promise I only started singing when the police needed to evacuate the train. And everything about him, someone else tweeted the other day that they like to sing very loudly and badly at gigs to ruin other people's videos. And he just said, I've been doing that for years. I think it's just an extraordinary thing that James Blunt has single-handedly changed his image without any recourse to a large check being sent to a PR consultant, don't you think? Because he was considered to be kind of, by a lot of people, absolute anathema. And now he's just... you see this just being incredibly characterful and funny.
Well, I think what happens is when people get tired of duffing you up, they then re-embrace you, don't they?
Yeah.
So, do you remember for years, Phil Collins was the butt of every cheap joke on every comedy channel, every comedy TV show.
He was the stock joke, wasn't it?
Stock joke. Ropey comedian looking for a laugh. Just put the word Phil Collins in your next joke, and it'll be all right. And of course, and all that can happen after that is people start going, actually, Phil Collins is really good. And so, so he's kind of re-embraced, quite rightly too. It's funny that business about playing a song if England lose. I remember Neil Finn telling me years ago, that he was at Twickenham when the All Blacks, the New Zealand All Blacks, suffered one of their rare defeats at Twickenham, and he was ushered into the dressing room to meet them. And of course, if you're a New Zealander, I no doubt met the All Blacks before, but the All Blacks in New Zealand are the royal family, the government, the culture of the nation,
untouchable, everything
rolled into one. They are just everything, and he was there when they lost, and they were beyond morose. So you're surrounded by these great hulking beasts of these resting black-clad orcs who steam and anger is coming off them. It's the least promising environment you could ever possibly be called upon to entertain. At which point, somebody produces an acoustic guitar, gives it to Neil, says, "Give us a song."
Oh,
so he did.
Did he? Presumably he applied. What did he play?
He played "Don't Dream It's Over."
Oh my Lord!
Which you kind of have to do. Can you imagine that surrounded by people who've just suffered, something that'll haunt them for the next 2 years or whatever.
That's an immense responsibility. It's also a wonderful thing to be able to do.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Oh, that's magnificent.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
We're recording this on July the 6th, which is the anniversary of 2 Top of the Pops appearances. Bowie performing Starman on Top of the Pops in 1972. And also the Floyd doing See Emily Play, amazing sequence. Both those obviously still on YouTube on July the 6th, 1967. It's just funny how that Bowie one particularly is just it's become so important, hasn't it? It's such a touchstone. People talk about their lives being changed by it. I remember watching it. Did you watch it, though?
I did watch it, although it's quite interesting. We were talking to Dylan Jones about this some while ago, I remember. And Dylan said that he'd written somewhere about, being struck by Bowie's orange hair or whatever it was. And his father pointed out to him that at the time they watched it, they didn't have colour television. So he didn't know. And so I do think it was interesting because it indicates to what extent events like that get built up in the
public imagination.
And even more so post YouTube, when access to these things is so easy. But yes, I do remember seeing it, but it's only
I just looked it up to see who else was on that show.
Go on.
And he was on with, it's quite interesting actually, Gary Glitter's Rock and Roll Part 2, The Sweet, and then the New Seekers doing Circles. And then he came on directly after a clip, I think it was a video clip, of Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show doing Sylvia's mother. Wow. So you can see that, and Lulu was on that show too. And of course, being Bowie, he meets Lulu in the bar and they have a romance soon after. So there you go. But I mean, he came on directly after Dr. Hook, so it would have had even more impact.
So that's a television centre. So that's the bar at a television centre. Up on the top of the place. You remember that place when the BBC was an organisation primarily dedicated to drinking and just did a little bit of broadcasting in between the drinking, didn't it? The bar was the centre of the place. It was.
It was. This was the main office, wasn't it? Where all the work was done.
Our dear old friend Mike Appleton, no longer with us, who was the kind of editor of Whistle Test and so forth. And Mike had worked on Late Night Lineup, which older listeners may dimly remember was the BBC kind of arts program on late at night during the week in the late 60s. And it's where Joan Bakewell and all these kind of people came from. And frequently guests would not turn up. People booked to be interviewed on Late Night Lineup would not turn up. And so Mike or somebody would be dispatched to the bar.
To find anybody who might be suitable.
By suitable, they meant, willing to do it.
Available and probably lit up like a Christmas tree.
So if you ever see some kind of old clip from Late Night Lineup where somebody is just, droning on like a drunk, the reason is that they were dragged in as last-minute substitute for Noel Coward or whoever couldn't make it on the day. Anyway, sorry, get a tangent. That's the bar.
That's the bar.
I bet Starman, let's not forget, David Bowie recorded all of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars in 1971, previous year. Came back from America, did it later that year, and then played it to RCA, and RCA said, as record companies so often do, with justification, it's really good, but it needs a single. So David Bowie didn't say, I'm sorry, that will interfere with my artistic vision. I can't possibly do that. It's perfect. No, he said, fine. And he went away and wrote Starman.
Which is what absolutely made it, wasn't it?
Which was put on the record last. And which is what made it, because, the record came out. I don't think the record did very much at first. And then it was when he appeared in July.
It was.
On Top of the Pops. It was just that thing that just connected on that day.
On that day. And also his understanding of how TV worked. That bit where he says, I had to phone someone, so I picked on you, and he points directly into the camera.
He knew where the camera was. Absolutely.
He worked that out so
No,
perfectly.
he had the confidence to look at the camera, which most people don't have. But it does still amaze me when I look back to those days of, 25 million audiences or whatever for Morecambe and Wise's Christmas show or Till the Pops or I don't know, whatever it was. That you can see those things once, and 20 years later you meet somebody go, I saw that, you know what I mean? And, it's like we often quote, Morecambe and Wise did that routine about the memory man, where, who won the FA Cup in 1932 or whatever? Arsenal. There's still people of a certain age who are capable of saying the word Arsenal without going, Arsenal, just because of that one joke.
Makes me laugh.
That joke that was cracked once in whenever it was, I don't know, 96.
But we were all watching and we all imitated them the next day. Absolutely.
And it's absolutely extraordinary. But what was the other one you were talking about?
Pink Floyd's See Emily Play, which is an amazing clip, actually. Very, very psychedelic clip of them kind of miming to it. And also it struck what an incredible song it is. Emily tries but misunderstands. She's often inclined to borrow somebody's dreams till tomorrow. What amazing lines they were. 1967.
Does Sid cooperate on that?
Yes, he does, in a sense. Right. I mean, he's making an effort to mime reasonably convincingly. But very soon after that, he stopped cooperating. And
because Norman Smith, who was, of course, the Beatles' first engineer, who by the time Pink Floyd came along, he was a kind of A&R man at Abbey Road EMI. And Pink Floyd were his charges. And he was so bothered by Syd Barrett's lack of interest in putting himself over and doing any kind of, convincing miming performance on Top of the Pops, that he actually booked Studio One at Abbey Road, the big one, and took them in there and made them rehearse miming, prior to doing that show, which is pretty extraordinary, really. And I do think it's kind of fascinating that Bowie, the key turning point in his career was that moment when he embraced miming, didn't he? You know what I mean?
It was.
Said, this is fake. I know this is fake, but I'm going to do the best fake I possibly can, Whereas
I always wondered if the vocal on that might have been live, actually. Yeah.
Which might have been live?
I thought the vocal on that might have been live. Everything else is mimed, all the instruments. But it's possible. I don't know. But the point is, he totally understood the kind of artificial nature of that was worth pursuing, which people like the Pink Floyd became. We're above this. We're artists,
and
we shouldn't stoop to this.
Yeah, but you can't win. You can't win. Sending up miming is the oldest trick in the book, and it just looks boring.
And you look ridiculous. People just think, well, then you're insulting me, and you're letting yourself down. And why bother do it in the first place?
Absolutely, it's a very sixth form trick, isn't it?
It is.
It looks pathetic in retrospect.
The Word Podcast, walking the digital dog since 2007.
Any other business? We're joined by Alex Gold. Where in the world are you, Alex Gold?
I am in Naples, Italy today.
So, what have we been doing in the last week or so, Mark? Remind me, it's all a blur.
We've done various podcasts. I did a podcast with Katie Puckrick, who people listening will remember from The Word. She remember The Word TV program back in the day. And she was really good. She was just talking about just growing up in Virginia and the records she bought, and the band she liked. And also playing the part of Iggy Pop. She is the singer in a band called Lust for Life. Clem Burke on drums, Glenn Matlock bass, and Kevin Armstrong guitar, etc. And they're not a tribute band at all, but they play the whole of the Lust for Life album, and therefore she sings the part of Iggy Pop. She's very good about that. We talked to Dylan Jones, didn't we, about his memoir?
Just one further thing on Katie Puckrick. Didn't you talk about yacht rock? Isn't it?
Yacht rock. Yeah. She's got a box set out.
Wow.
And is very enthusiastic about yacht rock, about which I know very little, which is Christopher Cross and, isn't it? It's Andrew Gold.
Doobie Brothers, the Sanford
Doobie Brothers, etc. And
right.
so she likes that very much. And also she was the backing dancer, a dancer and backing singer with the Pet Shop Boys. She's good on that too.
Oh, really?
Dylan Jones' memoir, that's good. His whole world growing up in the London in the early 80s, the Blitz Club and stuff. And we talked to a guy called Corey De Brewer. De Brewer? Is that pronounced right?
I think Corey De Brewer has written a book about EPs in praise of the EP, which is long overdue, really, that somebody should perform that service for the EP. So that enabled us to once more get out our copies of the Beatles' Twist and Shout and brandish them at the cameras, as we seem to do quite frequently on these occasions. So all that stuff is stuff that will be coming to you in full, in glowing colour, early, if you've taken the important step of joining our community of Patreon supporters and becoming one of those valued individuals who's helping keep this massive venture moving forward into the future. And Alex, I think you can tell us about some people who've joined their ranks in the last week or so.
I can indeed. There's a group of new patrons we have to welcome, and I'm going to start with Lord Wright.
Lord Wright, okay, good to have you aboard. Good to have a member of
your
the
lordship.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's what we should do. We should say this in the future, that you're not becoming a patron supporter. You're being raised to the peerage. We've moved you into the upper house.
And we should give you a new title.
There you go. Carry on.
You become the Earl of Essex or whatever.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, next up we have Mark Piper.
Mark Piper.
Very good.
Lord Mark Piper.
Literally being piped aboard.
Yeah. Carry on.
We have just simply Kevin.
Kevin.
No need.
All right,
for
we'll see what we can do to ennoble Kevin further.
He's that noble. He doesn't need a surname. That's why he's just Kevin.
Okay.
And we also
we'll issue him with a coat of arms in due course. Go on.
we have 3 annual patrons, and just a reminder that if you subscribe annually, you get a 15% discount. And these annual patrons are Mark Younger.
Hello,
Very
Mark.
good. Welcome aboard.
Christina Robertson.
Hello, Christina.
And Henry Hemming. Those are our annual patrons. However, if they were to subscribe to the Clubhouse tier, they will be joining us digitally on the occasion of their birthday, as is right now Richard Lewis.
The Word Podcast, one of the few things you really need in life.
Okay, hello, Richard, and happy birthday. Is it? When was the great day?
That was on Midsummer's Day, which is the best birthday to have because it's the longest day of the year.
It's the longest one.
Longest day. Wonderful.
And a lot of people can celebrate your birthday by going down to Stonehenge, don't they? And
Yeah, I
covering
should say,
themselves with woad.
yeah, get the orange spray paint out and
Yeah, of
That's
course. Yes, rather
This
unfortunate.
one's for Richard.
Yes. So, Richard, as is customary on the occasion of your birthday, we ask you to throw a conversational log on the crackling log fire that is the word of your ear, permanent discussion of all things popular music and related. What have you got?
So this is about song length. Now, I'm sure we can all think of songs that would be immeasurably improved by being a bit shorter. But
Yep.
I would like to know if either of you, are there any songs that you actually wish went on longer?
God. You could argue that all songs are the right length because they're the length that the person who wrote them decided they ought to be.
I would argue about that. I think you should sit through Sister Ray by the Velvet Underground, and then you'd probably agree that some pruning might be in order.
Well, except that now I know what you. I think I know what you're saying, but I can remember hearing that for the first time in a flat above Wood Green High Road in, I think, probably 1970, and hearing it, and kind of half the point of it was that it went on far too long. You know what I mean? That was kind of part of its charm. Had it sought to be like anything else, it would have lost some of its power. You know what I mean? Because the whole point about it was, we're the Velvet Underground, and we don't conform to your idea of, 14 tracks on a record or whatever, and where's a single and so forth. So while I might not necessarily want to hear it again tomorrow, I think its length was a great part of its charm, if that's the right word.
I'd agree, because if it isn't that length, it isn't that song.
Yes.
It's another song. It's like Song 2 by Blur is fantastic because it's whatever it is, just under 2 minutes long. If it was 3 minutes long, it wouldn't be Song 2. It would be something else. There's only one Beatles song which I think feels unedited, and that's I Want You, She's So Heavy, but, which is a very long song, but it wouldn't work if it didn't have that whole sequence at the end, which builds up and builds up and builds up in intensity, then cuts off. And that's the point of the song. So I don't think you can argue with the length of anything. Leonard Cohen once said that, I interviewed him, and he said he'd written something like 80 verses for Hallelujah, but he only uses 5. Well, that's fine. I don't want any more than that, obviously. 5 is what the song is.
Yeah. Do you know the story, Richard, of Bob Dylan's Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands, which is the first kind of well-known long song? And it's not that long, really, in retrospect. It's on Blonde on Blonde, so it came out in 1966.
But it was one side of an album, so it seemed long.
Yeah, it seemed long. It was
actually about 11 minutes.
And the story goes that he recorded that whole record in Nashville with a bunch of guys, Charlie McCoy and Kenny Buttery and whatever. And these guys were used to just doing, 10 country hits a day for whoever it was, George Jones or whatever. And they were used to things being 2.5 minutes long. And they had no notion that Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands was going to go on as long as it did. So you keep hearing false climaxes in their performances because they all seem to be assuming, oh, this is the last one. Surely he's not going to start yet.
Builds, doesn't it?
Builds and builds. Then they get to the end of it and he starts again.
And they're all looking at each other going, what? Can't be. I'm on treble time now, so great.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you have a nomination, Richard, of something that you think should be longer?
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of British psychedelia of the 60s. And there's a fantastic song by The Herd called From the Underworld.
I know it well.
I know it, yeah.
Got to number 6. And it's fantastic. Talk about kitchen sink production. It's got everything on there. There's church bell, and there's fuzz guitar, and there's church organ, and there's a military bugle solo. They really, there's probably Mellotron on there as well, I'd imagine. But there's this very ghostly choir in the background, and right at the end of the song, they bring them into sort of the foreground of the song, and they're singing this very haunting kind of
Oh, yes, they are.
I get hairs on the back, go up on the back of my neck every time I hear that. But then just as they bring them in, they fade them out. And I could have at least another minute of that because it's such a beautiful melody. But just as they get
why go
going,
to all the effort of getting the choir and everything and not use them for longer?
I never thought of that.
Yeah.
The choir probably just popped in from the next door studio where they've been busy doing, a commercial for This Is Luxury You Can Afford with Cyril Lord or whatever. That's just the way those kind of things work, But no, I can imagine, I can see what you're talking about, Richard, now, because those Herd singles, that was From the Underworld, and then they had another one, didn't they? Which is
I Can Fly.
Oh, is that right? Okay, I can't remember. They used to do. I saw the Herd at in Leeds in 1967, when Peter Frampton was still the face of whatever 68. Year he was supposed to be. 68, so it was before it was early. So they were very good actually. And their big party piece was they used to do a really long version of Bob Dylan's I Want You, where the length was kind of part of the point. Did that ever end up on a record? It must have done somewhere or another. But the odd thing about the Herd is that they were kind of very much aimed at traditional Radio 1 and getting on top of the pops or whatever. So their records had to be short, even though they were made as if they were going to go on for 10 minutes. But actually, you're only going to get 2.5 minutes of them, which is kind of part of the charm, I suppose, at the time. But now I can well see what you're talking about. I love those things that you hear just at the fade. Marvin Gaye's Let's Get It On, as he gets towards the end, as it's just starting to fade, you hear a single hand clap. Just goes like that. And it's not followed by another one. And you always have to just listen into the fade until you hear the hand clap. And then you know it's definitely over. But no, that's a good. So, have you got any more suggestions, or that's your main suggestions from the Underworld?
That one in particular, I get angry when it fades out.
I get angry.
That's brilliant. Well, that's not the emotion that they were looking to
all these
engender.
Years later, there's a bloke still getting angry.
Still getting angry. Bastards, keep going. That's wonderful.
Another song.
Oh, dear. You're sitting there on your scatter cushion with your floral shirt on, really pissed off.
Another song moments I find really sublime, and I wish it could go on longer, but it would mess the song up, is you remember the band The Motors, the kind of new
wave? Yeah, I certainly do.
And they had a song called Dancing the Night Away.
Yes.
Great record.
There's a fantastic, jangly 12-string guitar solo in it that's just beautiful. But if it did go, I could listen to that all day, but if it went on longer, it would completely throw the song out because it just wouldn't make any sense having it go on for another 24 bars or whatever.
Right.
But at least it would calm you down after listening to the Herd, so it would have some value.
Did you know the Herd appear in a British movie as themselves? There's a spy drama from the late 60s called Otley, starring Tom Courtenay.
Yes, there is.
Called what? Otley?
Otley. Otley. It's a place in Yorkshire, Mark.
Written by Dick Clement and Ian Lafreniere.
Yes, of course, yes.
The Herd appear as themselves as extras, just ran in a crowd scene. It's a very strange movie appearance.
I'm trying to remember the names of all the members of the Herd apart from Peter Frampton. Andy Bound played the...
Andy Bound had a great haircut.
Was a tall bass player, Gary something. Can't remember the name of the drummer at all. It'll come to me later. Well, it's good to be reminded of the Herd on this rainy Saturday morning, and it's good to be with you, Richard, to celebrate, albeit belatedly, your birthday, and to thank you for your support as a stout Patreon supporter. We very much value, and we look forward to talking to you next year.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.